IFAB Online.
Welcome to IFAB Online.
Yokoso IFAB Online. Hello and welcome. The next hour is focused on fundraisers in Europe seeking funding in Asia. I'm Craig Pollard, your host from here in Okinawa, Japan. Right now, I'm on the fringe of a typhoon, so please forgive the odd window rattle and gust of wind. We're joined here today by Tracy Goh in Singapore and by Karen Kearney in the UK. Each of us is going to take 10 minutes to tell you everything we know about fundraising in Asia for European organizations and projects. After these three presentations, I'm going to ask Tracy and Karen some difficult questions about fundraising in the region, which I'm hoping will create a useful conversation that will help to make your global fundraising in Asia smarter and sharper. So first up, Tracy is our expert on Asian culture and giving, having been fundraising in Singapore, Hong Kong, and China for the past 15 years. She is chair of Chapel & York Singapore Foundation. Over to you, Tracy.
Thanks, Craig. Hi, everyone. This is Tracy, calling from Singapore. So, as Craig has mentioned, I've raised funds for the last 15 years in the region, mainly for the universities in Singapore, as well as in healthcare, where I manage an endowment fund for a hospital. In recent years, I actually headed a couple of local charities as well, and I had a hand on an overseas startup charity in Singapore. Sadly, that didn't take off very well because the culture didn't quite mix. So that's where I come in. I will be doing more of a candid approach to illustrate the different behavioral patterns and practices of how Asia culture is going to be equally important, but many of us keep forgetting. What do you mean by culture? It's not about your nationality, it's not about your ethnicity. It's actually how different groups of people act, think, and behave because of their age, their socioeconomic status, their education background, upbringing, etc. So when we talk about international fundraising, you need to be culturally competent, which means you need to know how to interact with people, interact and engage with people that like your prospects, your donor, your alumni, and your parents. And you must be able to be flexible to adapt to the other person's culture, norms, which is about food, business, and family. So it's big, but it's all about what you do day in and day out, actually. So, okay, let's talk about these cultural variables in various titles. Okay, so first, I want to talk about relationships. Actually, when you're in Europe, I think you are more focused on what we call deal-focused cultures, where relationships actually grew out of transactions and contracts that have been made. But actually in Asia, it's the other way around. So it's very much relationship-focused. So your donations, your transactions, and your contracts are usually derived from developed relationships. First, you must have the relationship, then you can have anything else from it, business or donation, things like that. And in Asia, okay, seniority and rank is very, very important. Never forget about that. Okay, So when you do come to Asia, always try to engage your senior leaders, either your university president or your chief development officer at one point, during the contact. So because we need to show respect and commitment in the region, in Asia, it's very important. So you don't just go at a more junior level, always engage your senior levels to show respect, actually. And in Asia, corporate settings, actually, usually it's a top-down directive, so which is why it's so important to get to top man. So don't waste time at executive levels unless you are sure they can open the door for you to go all the way up where all the decision makers are. Yeah? Okay? Right. So that brings us to talk about communication. In Asia, it's all about face-to-face. Yeah? phone calls, yeah, text, yeah, but you still need that face contact. I know COVID is interrupting this a little, but I think we're starting to be able to travel. So make sure you have a good travel budget to do regular visits, to visit your overseas prospects and donors, yeah? Do make plans, okay? And if you're talking about China, especially, make sure your marketing collaterals are in Chinese, yeah? Regardless whether your contact person in China speaks perfect English, writes perfect English, it's a form of respect and they think of it as very important. So you must have at least a simple version or whatever version you can do, but in Chinese. When you are talking in a group, always show respect. Of course, your focus is the top person, yes. Try to engage everyone in the group because, you know why? Because it's the junior person that you'll be liaising with. It's how they do it in Asia setting. So always make sure you know the person's PA, secretary, or whoever person is doing the follow-up for you. So that's very important. So you do not want to ignore the person in the group as you don't want to offend that person. So show respect to everybody in the group. Try to communicate, even eye contact, at least a little nod if you don't have opportunity to speak to the person. Yeah. Okay. Time. Always be punctual. Always be punctual because Asia, we have a very busy schedule and we like to stick to schedules. So don't try to, if you're really, really late for any reason, please let the person know. Okay, this don't just apply to meetings, this apply to dinner engagements and lunch engagements and tea as well. Okay, so everything. So please be punctual. Yeah. Okay. Let me try to focus a little bit more about the business etiquettes in China. Okay. Well, I'm sure everybody is very interested to know about China because there's so many people who are so rich in China and you want to raise funds from them, right? Okay. So Asia, closeness is something that you need to keep a distance actually. For example, in France, right, where you know the person a little bit more, your friends, you meet, even a business contact that you have been liaising for a while, you may do the kiss on the cheek thing. But in Asia, especially in China, just stick to the handshake, please, regardless of how well you know them, no kiss on the cheek. Just keep it professional, okay? And when you sit down, and a professional sitting especially, is very, very important, yeah? Because even entering the room is important because in China itself, it's also practiced very much in Hong Kong. Singapore, not so, but usually the highest ranking person will enter the room first. So that would be the highest ranking person of the group. Yeah? Okay. The host needs to sit to the left of the most important guest. Just take note of this. And always place, like for a dinner engagement, a round table, place the guest of honor facing the door. So sitting is important as well. Okay, so we talked about respect in communication earlier. We talked about observing seniority. Now, I want to stress this. Face and respect is utmost important in Asia, especially to the Chinese. Yeah. So this also applies to correspondence. For example, when you are sending out emails and letters, inviting them to events and things like that, please don't send them a link for them to type in an online form kind of thing. This, you send it to their PA. Never send it to them, please. So this is seen as rude and disrespectful. So this not just apply in corporate setting, this actually applies to even associations and societies in Asia setting, because sometimes you're talking about certain foundations or family associations and things like that, So always show respect and face. Don't discuss business during meals, okay? That's a no-no, unless the host initiate that. Meal times is just talking about maybe indirect business references. It's all about building that relationship, that closeness with the person you're trying to develop that relationship with. So talking about this, and one thing that we all need to be very, very mindful of, which I think a lot of people are not aware. When you at dinner engagement and lunch engagement in Asian setting, we like to click glasses. Okay, the junior person should always hold the glass lower than that of the senior person. Okay, this applies to all settings. It's always the case. So always do this. The senior person is always the one with the higher one. Okay. Another thing, we talk about respect, which is why, as well as space, right? So we do not say no in Asia setting, especially for Chinese. We do not say no. So we will not tell you if it's a no. So we'll just say maybe, or we'll see. Let me share with you a little bit of a success example, how we managed to raise funds in China. When I was in National Technology University, we raised a couple of $1 million from China alumni. How did we go about doing that? Okay, 3 reasons. First, we have very strong relationships, which was built by the alumni office. We have over 20 alumni chapters set up in China, actually, right? They actually hold regular events. So there is always an interaction between the institution as well as the alumni in the different regions where all the chapters are in China. And a couple of all these alumni do have businesses in Singapore or Hong Kong. So the major donors, the big money, were mostly donated actually through all these companies. Yeah, well, it's because, transferring money out from China, we all know that's an issue. Okay, even now. Okay, so it's also good to know that there also are small donations, but interestingly, they're all done in cash. So sometimes the alumni director, when they're attending the events in China, will end up having a handful of cash to bring back to Singapore because they raise funds among themselves, some money, a couple hundred, a couple of thousands, and then they just hand the cash to my alumni director or whoever is representing from the development office to bring back to Singapore. That's how things are done. Okay, that's my very quick sharing. So I'll leave it to Karen to give you a more structured view of how she raised funds successfully from Asia. And then we will come back with Craig and Karen with a different aspect to answer more questions on how to do it more successfully in Singapore, Hong Kong, and China.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Tracy. I think you've just perfectly demonstrated the value of having local cultural expertise wherever we're raising money from. Now, next up is Karen. Karen has led fundraising in Canada, the US, and the UK, and has spent a lot of time fundraising in Singapore and Hong Kong for Edinburgh Napier University, among others. So over to you, Karen.
Thank you, Craig. Tracy, as I was sitting listening to you, I was thinking, I wish I'd met you 15 years ago when I started raising money in Asia, because a lot of what you touched on, I perhaps learned the hard way or through time, which is not a bad way to do it. But I'll kind of touch on many of the elements that you've said and the examples that I have as well. The one thing, Craig and Tracy, that I found raising money across the globe and in Asia, there are differences, but the one thing that's always struck me about donors in particular is that donors want a lot of the same things. And what I mean by that is they want to have impact from their giving. They want to be able to demonstrate that impact and know they're making a difference. So I was kind of reflecting on that, thinking that's one thing to always keep in mind. Cultural sensitivities absolutely are important, but remember that the donor relationship is key to that as well. In Edinburgh Napier University had been operating in Hong Kong when I joined them for some time, and I'm never quite sure if this is fact or myth, but the university had a Hong Kong Scholarship Trust which had been set up probably now about 30 years ago, and it was a Scottish businessman based in Hong Kong who wanted to establish it for a number of Scottish universities for Hong Kong students to have an experience at a Scottish university. And I think Napier was just in the right place at the right time. And so having that scholarship trust did make my life a bit easier when I started to fundraise in Hong Kong and in Singapore, because we had some Singapore connections on the trust as well. And as I'm sure many of you are familiar, there is a long Scottish heritage and tradition of Hong Kong and Scottish connections going as far back as Jardine Matheson, Swire, and many other companies. And I actually, factoid that I found the other day was that Jardine Matheson bought its first plot of land in Hong Kong in 1841 for £565. So there you go, there's a factoid for all of you traveling to Hong Kong. But I think the one thing to remember is, even although we had those cultural connections through Scotland, it didn't give us a clear open door or pathway to donors, but it certainly made life a bit easier. And many of the cultural aspects that Tracy touched on, I kind of had my education through engaging with those networks. And so there's a strong Scottish diaspora in Hong Kong, and we certainly utilised that network, as well as the networks of the scholarship trustees, who are still operating and still sending students to Scotland from Hong Kong. And so I was thinking about the best way to kind of relay our experience in the time that we have. And I thought I would just kind of give you a snapshot of Edinburgh Napier's history, as well as the money we were able to raise. And actually, we were able to raise, probably in my tenure, about 40% of our philanthropic income came from Hong Kong. And in particular, most, if not all, but most of our 6- and 7-figure gifts came from Hong Kong. And it didn't happen right away, it happened over time. But it's back to what Tracy was talking about, you know, the relationships. It is about relationships. I probably spent a significant amount of my time in Hong Kong. And again, during the 10 years I was at Napier, we had a prime opportunity where the government was releasing land for an international university to come into Hong Kong. And so Edinburgh Napier took that opportunity. And I think that's when things really changed for us. We had been known, we'd been delivering education in Hong Kong for over 20 years. I think then we were the largest provider of transnational education in Hong Kong. Not so much sure if that's still the case, but we were then. But looking at building a campus in Hong Kong changed the landscape for us significantly, and it gave us access to government, which we'd never really accessed before, gave us access to some of the larger families in Hong Kong, because this was, and I think this is one of the key elements, this was something that was going to add value to Hong Kong. And I think often, you know, we go into countries and we seek to raise money from alumni or non-alumni, but one of the key messages I would have is, what is your local resonance? You know, what is the reason that you're in that country, and what are you giving back to that country? So the potential campus for us was a real opportunity. And as we were told by many, we were no longer the best kept secret in Hong Kong. Because once we started to talk about how long we'd been there, the number of students we'd educated, with the largest alumni base in Hong Kong as well, people really started to pay attention. And although that campaign, given the government changed their direction and chose to then use the land for much needed housing in Hong Kong, we actually had really embedded our story. And so the Edinburgh Napier story was better known in kind of higher circles. So I thought one of the ways to just kind of demonstrate the impact is to just talk about a couple of the gifts that we secured and how we did that. And I go back to one of them. Never, you know, what is it in fundraising? If you don't ask, you don't get. And I also learned that although we had a scholarship trust, and I knew the trustees very well, I had no idea that one of the trustees was the father of a daughter married to one of the major Hong Kong families. So once he invited me to an event and I walked in, and I knew the people because I'd seen them in everything from Tatler to the news, but I didn't know that they were part of his family. So never make an assumption that you know everything about the people you're connected with. But from that, we developed that family relationship over a long period of time. We also connected it to their business interests. So the students that they chose to support, for them, had relevance because of the sector that they operated in. Two of the other major donors where we secured 3 million over a period of time, and the other one was £1 million. And Tracy, I was smiling when you said about, although the most important person enters the room first and speak to them, make sure you speak to the others, because I have a very close relationship still with the PA of one of the major donors that we secured a gift from. And I also worked very closely with the CSR team of another major donor. Again, these were both major tycoon families that Napier probably could never have got access to if it hadn't been for our networks. And in the traditional forum where, you know, someone of significance hosted a lunch, and again, Tracy, to your point, the Vice Chancellor was there, the senior academics, and I was there. I was always very clear that my role was to listen, to follow up, and although they knew I was the Director of Development, the person they wanted to hear from was the Vice Chancellor, and what their vision was and how they were going to create the impact for the donor with the gift they were about to make. And so we were very lucky, again, through our Scottish connections, to have someone in one of the banks introduce us to two major families. But after that introduction, there had to be a reason for them to continue to connect with us. And the same with a major family in Singapore as well. And again, it was through the Scottish connection that we got in the door, but we had to really demonstrate our value, and we spent a long time building those relationships. I think it probably took us a good 3 to 4 years from the starting point to actually being able to generate this size of gift. We had some smaller gifts over time. Our alumni were giving, you know, again, as you said, Tracy, in cash at events, because we hosted an annual alumni event which had a Scottish theme. And so some of the things that I kind of learned over my time there, and again, building on what Tracy said, is that people will always be polite to you. They will always say yes, they will always host you for dinner, but don't confuse social enthusiasm with an interest in giving, because we all love nice dinners, but at some point they're actually not interested in giving to you. Find that link between your organisation and what the donor's interests are. They may want to be respectful of the person who made the introduction to you, but there needs to be a reason for them to still give to you. Know when to walk away. They're not your friends. They're donors that you're seeking a relationship with for the organisation that you work for. And even if they're not forthcoming with a gift, they may have networks, they may be influencers, they may be ambassadors for you. So I always say, when you're asking, think about what your ask is. And if you're realising it's not going to be financial, then how else can you keep connected to that relationship? Engaging at the high level, as Tracy said, and building that relationship beyond the gift. Each of the major donors who gave to us visited Scotland. They did come and they did see the university, and they did see some of the students that they had benefited. And visit often and be present, even in this virtual environment.
Thanks, Karen. That's a really helpful, more of a detailed dive into this example. I like how you ended. I like be present. I think it's a great lesson that resonates across all fundraising. So now me, since I started in fundraising 25 years ago, I've worked with donors, non-profits and fundraisers in more than 70 countries now, mainly in Asia, Africa and the Middle East. I now live in Japan, and now I'm going to take a look across the wider Asia region to share some lessons from working with donors, non-profits and fundraisers in some of the less familiar fundraising places across Asia. Then I'm going to share 5 sort of general recommendations about global fundraising now that will help in Asia and beyond. So, fundraising from Europe into Asia tends to focus on the traditional donor hubs for historically sensible reasons. English is widely spoken. Donors are well defined in places like Hong Kong, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur. Grant-making institutions feel familiar. We know how to talk to these companies, family foundations. So European organizations and fundraisers tend to be much more comfortable operating in these places, and the barriers to entry are lower, but the competition is high. So what happens when we step out of these sort of comfort zones into the wider region? What if we have natural donor groups elsewhere? And what's it like to fundraise in places like Thailand, Japan, Myanmar, Cambodia, India, Nepal, and of course, China? If we have a competitive advantage elsewhere, we can escape from these sort of more trodden routes, as long as we're also able, as Karen said, and committed to delivering value to the donor group for the long term. So let's start here in Japan. Nothing related to money is done quickly in Japan. No country does process and bureaucracy quite like here. It is the most complex, intricate, careful fundraising I've ever done. It requires subtlety and grace, which are two things I have never been accused of having, which should give you all hope. Now, English is not widely spoken, and as Tracy said, nor is the word no. The closest to a hard no I ever got was, that might be a little difficult. Respect and honor, as Tracy said, are primary and easily lost, so having a respected and connected local guide should be number one on all of our lists, along with fundraising targets that are filled with patience. No country does stewardship like Japan, so the pressure is on when Japanese donors visit Europe, for example. Managing expectations is critical, but also making it personal as well. Small personal gifts and call in all of our favors to give them something they couldn't otherwise experience. But Japanese donors are also amongst the most forgiving of donors I've come across. I mean, trust me, I've got dozens of cultural errors behind me, and none of which has been fundamentally terminal. So how about somewhere else, say Southeast Asia? Let's say Thailand. Bangkok is a fundraising hub for big INGOs. Regional programs are managed from Bangkok, and major operations like UNICEF are growing their Asia Pacific major gifts and mass marketing programs from there. It's competitive, but there's also a lot of money in Thailand. Major giving is well established for religious causes, education, and there is a network of foundations. But the domestic need for funding is also high, like much of Southern and Southeast Asia, and local branches of international NGOs are beginning to invest in their own domestic fundraising. They've traditionally been funding from INGOs and from bilateral and multilateral sources of income from overseas government. But to diversify their income and achieve financial independence and self-sustainability, this is their only real option. It's the right thing to do, because overseas aid is only going in one direction. But it does mean that it's more competitive for us going into Thailand, places like Thailand who have a great big social burden. Fundraising in places like Thailand will definitely test our creative management of ethical differences. So I think before we step into a place like this, it's really important to know where our red lines are. So even if there is a big juicy donation being dangled in front of us, we won't cross them. After a year's work, I had to recommend to my Vice Chancellor to reject a $4 million donation from a Thai foundation because of ethical concerns about their hidden involvement in the research process. Now, China. China is the big player in the region, and fundraising into China is already really challenging. And it's only going to get harder. Sorry, I'm not painting a very rosy picture here. Overseas fundraising is tough. Getting cash from China directly, as Tracy mentioned, has always been nearly impossible. Small donations, yes, but big donations usually flow through places like Hong Kong. But political tensions there are going to make these things more difficult. Never mind the regional tensions with India, Japan, Taiwan, and beyond with the US and UK. Domestic fundraising in China was really beginning to blossom at the beginning of this year, but this is starting to die back. The first registered Chinese NGO, the IU Foundation, has recently shed more than half of its staff, and they have half a dozen pretty generous billionaires on their board. Maybe more than any other global fundraising region, China demands value from its overseas partners. But if we can deliver genuine value and help build local institutions, build relevant partnerships, and bring our expertise to the region, then this market has real potential still. Somewhere that's not a common place to seek funding from is Myanmar. It proves that there are undiscovered and new groups of major donors everywhere, if we can understand the local and the regional giving landscape. and why donors really value our work. I mean, really value it. For example, one of my non-profit clients in Myanmar was aiming for donations from wealthy monks. Key to this was their case for support. The challenge they had was to express the value that they were bringing to these monks, and they had to equate their education work with karma, which is credit in the afterlife, which is quite a leap. It seemed far-fetched in the room when we first explored the idea, but it really worked. And linking this up with a deep understanding of the local drivers and motivations to give is vital. So let's move up for an even higher view of fundraising in Asia. So what are the 5 things that I think we really need to talk about now? What will make our fundraising across borders sharper and smarter? First, investment in global fundraising. I'm not here to tell you that it's all going to be okay. At the moment, it's pretty chaotic in the fundraising world across the entire world. Nobody really knows that it's going to be okay. The next 5 years are going to be tough. Some COVID impact on global fundraising has been immediate. Other ripples are going to take years to reach us. Donors' investment portfolios and pension funds have been hammered. Partnerships that are being honored today may not be renewed. And the cash for today's government stimulus packages is actually being borrowed from future tax income and spending cuts. Now, add to this is a happy picture, add to this deteriorating relations between China, the US, Hong Kong, UK, India. It's looking a lot trickier for global fundraising in Asia. We're all having really hard, horrible, but necessary conversations. And most of these are focused on what can be cut, what we can keep. But we must also make sure that global fundraising investment is part of these conversations, because everything is changing right now. And my personal view is that we should try to push through as much positive change as we can and dare to. Now is an opportunity to make objective, evidence-based decisions about the efficiency of every single one of our overseas and our domestic donor groups. Our fundraising hours have never been more precious. And we have to prioritize our time fiercely. In this regard, there's actually an upside to COVID, a few actually. We can now immediately ask any fence sitters for a donation or cut them loose, politely of course. And for the first time, domestic donors are being engaged using exactly the same methods as global donors. So if we do have a natural overseas donor audience who clearly values our work, and if we have a very powerful value proposition for them, now might be a great time actually to start that conversations, because new opportunities are going to emerge alongside this new sort of digital face-to-face hybrid of global fundraising, whatever it becomes. Now, this is definitely the time to dial back investment in some donor groups that aren't performing. Now, controversially, is the time to say no more to the sweet couple in London who organise a lovely music concert every year that raises a few £1,000s but sucks up all the fundraising team's time for 2 weeks of the year. We all have those. But it's also the time to dial up investment in overseas donor groups who will perform. Instead of the lovely couple, maybe it's time to invest that time with a Hong Kong family foundation that feels really connected to one of our core projects, because these global opportunities may well be our foundation for the future. Now, we can make these decisions one by one. We don't just sort of switch off global fundraising when time gets tough. We dial bits up and we dial bits down. So after that light and airy start, here are a few more quickfire things we should probably all focus on to give ourselves the best chance of succeeding in Asia. And these sort of apply to other regions as well. Number 2 will be value. We must focus on the value we offer and deliver to our Asian donors. This is everything. This is exactly what Karen said. This is everything. If we're delivering value, if we're present, then donors will respond. We also need to focus on our pipelines. We need to focus on those donors who have a best fit, working with donors who have a natural fit with us, who really value our priority work, who have the most capacity to donate, and who are most likely to donate. This is how we achieve our competitive advantage in a really tough environment. Third, I think Tracy's demonstrated this. Local expertise makes global fundraising possible. This is definitely true in Asia and in Africa and the Middle East. knowing the region's history, cultural norms, and being familiar with customs is important. Local expertise also really helps to build internal confidence and helps us practically navigate the unfamiliar. Language expertise is also vital, particularly true in places here in Japan. It's the most demanding fundraising I've ever done. And I feel that culture, customs, and traditions run very deep across Asia and are woven very tightly together with language. And without language, I feel we're forever on the outside of the conversation. And this is the part of the reason why I think seasoned professionals really struggle to make fundraising work beyond the odd 1 or 2 donations here in China, Japan, elsewhere. Fourth, now, I used to be an accountant, and I do believe that financial expertise is more important than cultural expertise. I trained with KPMG. I definitely would not recommend that experience, but financial literacy has been a vital tool for my overseas fundraising, understanding where the disposable wealth is in a region, how it flows, what triggers it, and who decides on donations. This knowledge helps us to know better where and when to dip our fundraising bucket, so to speak. And asking these questions at the macro, at the sort of country or regional level, and also at the micro individual level. For example, last year in Myanmar, a non-profit client had been focused on engaging these wealthy monks until we stepped back. And then we mapped where the money and financial decisions are made. And it turns out it's the sponsors of the monks who make restricted donations. So the monks didn't have any power at all about how they spent the money. So this non-profit shifted their focus, and it was a useful pivot that unlocked $4 million worth of donations within 7 months. So financial flows. Lastly, everything, I think, when we cross borders to engage overseas donors, everything feels different when compared to fundraising at home. Culture can be an intimidating barrier, but in truth, almost every cultural faux pas is forgivable. For me, the most important parts of fundraising remain the same. Again, as Karen said, when we reach overseas for donations, fundamentally donors donate if they trust us and if we present them with an idea and a project that they value. And the reasons why people donate are also consistent across the world. We're all, again, as Karen said, we're all motivated by the same things, just at different degrees. So I think one of my key takeaways is to always focus on the person in front of us to avoid these stereotypes and culture distractions. In Asia, we lead with respect and impact because only this will deliver funding exactly as it does anywhere else in the world. And I think let's relax and enjoy it. I think learn from many inevitable mistakes. I think try to make them only once and enjoy the experience. So that's all from me for now. If you want to hear more from me on these subjects, you can join my specialist session. But now we're going to make the most of our Asian expertise that we have in the room with some questions for Tracy and Karen. So, are you both ready to answer some difficult questions?
Ready to go.
Fire away.
So, I talked a little bit about COVID. It's kind of the unavoidable subject of our time in fundraising. Can you both sort of take a moment to describe maybe 1 or 2 ways in which you think COVID will or is changing fundraising in Asia?
With COVID, because this thing, it's very community level, okay? So a lot of Singaporeans, even foreigners, whoever is in Singapore, actually jump in very quickly to the ship to make donations in cash, face masks, food, hand sanitizers, and everything. So from when it broke off from the very start. This has continued this couple of months. So donations are still seem to be very local-based, community-based still. We are very pleased. Okay, the government actually did some statistics. Okay, so Singaporeans actually donated Singapore dollars 90 million in the first 5 months of 2020. Okay, that actually equals to the entire 2019 donation that Singaporeans made. Wow, right? And actually about 30 to 40% of this went to COVID-related causes. And the statistics also showed that we have about 20% more volunteers which sign up with one of the main giving website, which we call giving.sg. So there are a lot more signups, a lot more charities registered themselves, more volunteers came through, a lot of donations came through there. Although it's not huge dollars, but it's, well, accumulation of small donations make a big impact, right? We all know that. So it actually made a huge difference. I'd like to highlight, Singapore government is quite generous. So we had some subsidies. All Singaporeans received at least $600 subsidy from Singapore government because of COVID, right? Because of job losses and things like that. So a lot of people actually donated this $600 to giving.sg.
Oh.
Yes, to charities of their pick. So this was something that I really want to share. And our government is also very quick. They created a agency website called sgunited.sg, where you have all the links to all the major charities and giving websites in Singapore, major like Temasek Foundation has done some huge stuff like donating face masks and things like that. All the big national level donations and causes are all linked from that website. So it's like a easy to go to thing that Singapore government actually did to help everyone in the community level, especially those who are of low income. Yeah, so it looks like this trend is still continuing for now. And because travel is restricted, a lot of people are still working from home here in Singapore, Asia, and even in China. So I don't know. So other things might be a little bit slow. So like Craig said, be patient. Karen also mentioned that you need to take years for major gifts to come in. So this is actually a very good time, like what Craig mentioned, that you need to keep that relationship live. Use technology, whatever tools, whatever means you can, keep that relationship strong and going. So fine tune your focus. Yeah. So yeah, that's my share on COVID, how it impacts Singapore actually. Karen?
Yeah, no, thank you, Tracy. I guess the challenge for many in the UK in particular is the inability to travel, or the limitations are on travel, and probably will not be lifted anytime soon. And kind of going back to something you've highlighted, Tracy, and hopefully Craig and I have demonstrated in our examples, is maintaining your networks and maintaining those connections are critically important. I heard someone say to me the other day, it's in good times and bad that we need to stay connected to those closest to us. But the fundraising community are creative and innovative, so it's time to kind of turn up the volume on the creativity. And we were speaking with one of our clients who has a huge alumni base in Hong Kong and Singapore, and just through brainstorming and kind of chatting about what they might be able to do, are now considering doing a virtual dinner using Zoom with a small group, but accessing a local caterer who they know and who's part of their alumni community, to create a menu for them and to deliver that to the homes of the people. And they can all eat it at different times, and but to have that kind of common sense of purpose. And then they've got a guest speaker coming in to talk to them. So it may not be perfect, the deliveries might be late, but actually, I think you said, Craig, people are a bit more forgiving at the moment. And I guess it's, use the technology you have, but stay connected, even when you're not. So back to that being present, even if it has to be virtually, you need to maintain your presence.
Well, just to add, in Singapore, we can't meet people right now. So it's just that, for example, we are all restricted to 5-person max at each seating, even at dining. So you can still go out and meet people for coffee sessions and in meeting rooms and things like that. Just make sure you have check-in. So we all have mobile app check-ins. It's very well done in Singapore. So you just need to click. We all do that everywhere we go. shopping mall shops, it's in and out, scanning in and out, everything. So once you do that digitally, we do have people checking, actually. So please do make sure you do that if you are in Singapore.
It's interesting. I think the travel is definitely just one of the many sort of logistical challenges we're going to have.
Yeah.
But I think in time this will come back, and I think we have to start embracing, I think, those that haven't, I think, the creativity of digital engagement. Do you have, apart from the virtual dinner, do you know of examples, Tracy, for example, of creative ways that people are using digital to maintain these relationships with Asian donors? And how is the digital engagement received by Asian donors?
Like I said, now we really can meet people. So we can still meet our prospects and donors out there. This works for Hong Kong as well. China, I'm not quite sure, but I think it's also limited, but you can still meet some people in some regions. So yeah, so we in terms of this face-to-face, we are very big on WhatsApp and in Asia, yeah, for Singapore and Hong Kong. China is WeChat, right? Okay. Yeah. And Korea, I think it's Line. Thailand is Line as well, I think. So
same as Japan. Japan.
Yeah. So yeah. So we do a lot of this phone video calls, or it's not a phone call anymore. Now people you see the trend where people are more willing to do a video call even from home or anywhere. So that could be beneficial for people to note as well. Yeah, so we can still meet people for coffee. So things are a little bit more normal right now. So which is why, okay, just a little bit commercial. Chapel and York is in Singapore, Hong Kong. So if you do need to raise funds in Singapore and Hong Kong, call us. We can help. Sorry, I can't help myself.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Interesting, because you both sort of touched on, Tracy talked about Singapore, about the community of donors really locally stepping up. Do either of you feel that this has sort of reawakened donors' sense of priorities to support local causes first, and maybe global causes second, and what impact this might have on global fundraising going forward?
It's an interesting question, Craig, and I think I have a kind of two-part answer. I sit on a board of an African charity, and I think that the major donor to that and trustees would say that yes, it probably is becoming a bit more difficult to raise money globally, and they're seeing money go locally. However, from our experience, and there's a lot of US data that looks at trends following major crisis, whether they're natural, economic, health, and COVID is a combination of all of those. So there's still a lot that is unknown. But I think what we're seeing and hearing, and we've had a series of conversations with charity leaders and vice chancellors but across the charitable sector, and what they're saying is that it's actually been a bit easier to connect with some of their major donors because they're not traveling and because they are available. So they're actually able to get calls in that might have taken 6 or 8 months if you were traveling to the country to see them. And so whether it's global or local, I'm not sure, but what it definitely is becoming more focused. Donors are becoming more focused in their giving. It was a trend we were seeing before COVID, and I think COVID will certainly highlight. So back to the staying connected piece, I think becomes even more critically important.
If you're talking about COVID, donations overseas, Singaporeans are still very enthusiastic about that. From the very basic thing that was the face mask shortage that was faced by a lot of countries at the very beginning stage of COVID, a lot of Singapore organizations or even individuals came about in groups. My Chinese clan associations came together in groups, donated money, bought face masks or donated cash, whatever, and we sent them overseas, and we arranged all these things. So when it comes to COVID-related causes overseas, Singaporeans are still very supportive. You just need to get the message out to right people, and that they're aware of this, because all of us see how badly that has actually impacted. Yeah, so if you can get the message across, you can still raise funds on a faster mode if it is COVID related.
Yeah, I guess much of the sort of fundraising bandwidth is, almost all of it has been taken up by COVID related projects. If you don't have anything in terms of projects that are relevant to COVID, it's affecting us all, but how do you cut through the sheer volume of interest and shifts to COVID related programs and relief?
In Asia, I think because COVID really starts from China and this region, right? So we are getting a little bit tired about COVID related as well. A lot of people are starting to. So if you have very well crafted projects that is different from COVID, but you can talk about how it impacts the life. It's all about how you impact one's life. That is the main focus right now. I think you can still get through to a lot of people at the moment in Asia. Yeah. So you must, like, for raising funds for university education. So maybe you can talk a little bit more how education impacts life, how without education, how it might, things like that. So all these focus, you should actually, try to tune it to your everyday life kind of well-being thing. And I think fundraising will still be a go in Asia.
And I think if I can add to that, Tracy, again, some of the conversations that we've been having, one major university with a massive alumni base in Asia deliberately chose not to launch a COVID project because they felt that the projects or the case for support they already had was the strength of the organization and demonstrated that longer term approach. So what they were able to do was to engage with their donors and talk to them about why they were not doing a COVID project, but actually keeping them engaged about what their kind of clear focus was for the future. And I think some of the charities we've spoken to, although they've not had COVID related projects, they have been demonstrating the need more than ever to invest in their core purpose, given the economic impact on them with losing staff and redundancies. And it's been very tough for many charities. I mean, we've seen here, I think 30 to 40% of staff have gone in some major charities. And so I think it's be true to thyself is a bit of the message as well, that this is, fundraising is not a short-term fix, it's a long-term game, as we know, and kind of keep your eye on the prize of the longer-term game.
Live auction kind of thing. It's kind of upcoming trend in Singapore because it's actually, this thing actually started from China, where you have live shopping. So where people have live video on Facebook or whatever things that they sell things live. So people have started to do donation stuff as well, on a smaller scale. For example, it's like, do you want to buy this package, and all these are package A or package B, or there's some company that I know that they're selling their products at a special premium price. How many packages you want to buy from them, for example, hand sanitizers or plates or bowls and things like that, and a portion of it goes to charity. So they are doing it as an auction online. So it's a upcoming trend in Singapore. So maybe you can explore that if you are looking into smaller kind of a donation, but it's more about keeping people engaged. So it's not so much about, raising that dollar. It's something more fun. Yeah, people are getting a bit sick of very stagnant kind of webinars and things like that, videos. In fact, my people who sell property estate now, they do a lot of live. Initially, they started with pre-recorded tours of the property they want to sell. So now they try to make appointment. They bring you around, the house. So that engagement again is back to engaging that relationship and that live face-to-face. You kind of try to fit that into the technology. So a good phone, keep that smile on, and just bring it around and show people around.
Yeah, I think it's a great example, I think, of the creativity that's coming through. And I think fundraisers that I know have huge amounts of creativity and are used to overcoming all sorts of problems in their day-to-day work. So I feel that there are many challenges, but I do feel that COVID has kind of leveled the playing field in some respects. And those that are able to creatively maintain these relationships are going to be the ones who succeed in the long term. But again, I think it does fundamentally come down to presence and delivering value in the region, which is easier if you have an alumni group. It's more difficult if you don't, if you're seeking non-donors. But at the same time, I think again, engaging digitally now, it's become a lot easier. So many of the barriers with global fundraising that I feel have sort of favored big institutions are now sort of dissolving. So I think these are difficult times, but I feel that there is a lot to be positive about. And I'd say to everyone, sort of keep your chin up and carry on. And I think thank you to Tracy and thank you to Karen for your time. I hope this has been useful to everyone, and I hope that this has helped to make your Asian fundraising a little smarter and a little sharper. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Karen and Craig.